A very warm welcome. You're watching World 360 with me, Akanksha Swaroop. It's been a week of supersonic international developments. We'll deep dive into all of that, but first up are the headlines. China angered by the United States' approval of a potential $1.1 billion weapons sale to Taiwan amid heightened tensions between Taiwan and China. Uyghurs demand accountability after the UN report on Xinjiang confirms China's atrocities against Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. Vostok 2022 commences in Russia with India and China participating. Will India be able to manage the balancing act between Russia and the United States? Weeks after fleeing the country, Sri Lanka's deposed President Gotabaya Rajapaksa returns home. And more than 1,200 people killed in record floods in Pakistan, with the southern Sindh province hit the hardest. And so this week, the UN Human Rights Office finally released a report on rights abuses in China's Xinjiang region. Even though the long-delayed report is scathing, it details a string of right violations against the Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang. But how significant is this report, and what will be its outcome for China? Let's find out. For years, the UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet was asking for unhindered access to Xinjiang. The reason? Only to assess Xinjiang's rights situation. Bachelet was finally allowed into China in May this year. But Bachelet's office came under pressure from China not to publish the report. So what does the UN report state? It says, and I quote, China's treatment of the Uyghur minority may constitute international crimes against humanity. The UN report also goes on to say that large-scale arbitrary detention occurred in Xinjiang during 2017 to 2019. And not just that, the 45-page report suggests possible forced sterilization based on accounts of the interviewees. So what's been the outcome so far? The UN Human Rights Office has now called on Beijing to immediately release detained individuals and clarify whereabouts of missing Uyghurs. The UN chief, Antonio Guterres, has also called for China to pay heed to the report's recommendations. Now you may want to know, who are the Uyghurs? There are about 12 million Uyghurs living in Xinjiang. They are a predominantly Muslim community of Turkish ethnicity, culturally different from China's majority of Han's ethnic group living in Xinjiang. Xinjiang is China's largest region in the northwest, bordered by 8 countries. These include the Central Asian republics, Russia, Afghanistan, Pakistan and India. Officially, Xinjiang is an autonomous region, but the region is subjected to major Chinese restrictions. China says the crackdown in Xinjiang is necessary to prevent terrorism. In fact, Beijing has denounced the UN report.
The so-called critical report you mentioned is planned and manufactured first-hand by the US and some Western forces. It is wholly illegal and invalid. The report is a hodgepodge of misinformation and is a political tool used as part of the West strategy of using Xinjiang to control China. The UN Rights Office sunk to becoming the thug and the accomplice of the US and the West against the vast majority of developing countries.
Even though Beijing has scoffed at the UN report, it could well be a game changer for the international response to the Uyghur crisis, especially for Islamic groupings like the OIC and GCC that have so far maintained a deafening silence. For a country with growing influence within the United Nations, the UN report is perhaps the beginning of China's accountability. Bureau Report, CNN News 18. And so what will the UN report mean for the Uyghurs? Let's try and get in a sense of perspective on the UN report and its impact. And for that, I'm joined in by my guest, Roshan Abbas, who's a Uyghur activist. It's important to highlight the fact that Roshan's sister is currently under forced labor in Xinjiang, and that her sister's husband has also been held hostage. Many thanks to you, Roshan, for joining us here on this broadcast. Now, my first question to you is that despite the UN report confirming China's atrocities in Xinjiang, what explains the silence of the Islamic groupings such as the OIC and the GCC?
It's something, you know, it is a confirmation from UN. So we are happy. We are happy that the report came up. It documents the illegal mass arbitrary detention, and the people, innocent people, are facing torture and sexual violence in the camps, and also oppressive and mass surveillance of our homeland in East Turkestan, and forced labor, and also violation of the productive rights are all, we have been saying for years that this is happening. Now it's in this report. So basically China's war on humanity is belated, and it's a war on human dignity, and China's waging a war on women, children, and the freedom and the democracy. So now we hope that, after this confirmation, it's time for UN to take actual tangible action.
Right. Roshan, also, despite the UN report confirming China's atrocities in Xinjiang, what explains the silence of the Islamic groupings? That is one question that remains, of course, unanswered.
Unfortunately, the Chinese government has been working on the disinformation and the false narratives on this atrocity, to whitewash the atrocity, or making like a smoke screen to many countries, like the Muslim majority countries and the member states of OIC and the other GCC countries. I look at them as being victims of China's manipulations, debt trap diplomacy, trade threats, and
right,
as well as the victims of ignorance. So if they have been trusting China, and if they have been listening to China's lies and false narratives, now they've got confirmation from United Nations. So I hope that it's going to ignite a change from those countries as well, because this report is being confirmed from United Nations. China is basically eradicating Islam. So every single Muslim leaders, any Muslim organizations should defend Islam. It's their responsibility to defend their faith.